The days that followed the boy's quiet plea were some of the most nerve-wracking of my life. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the fear etched on his young face, the bruises I had glimpsed, and the note he had secretly handed me. The ordinary neighborhood that had once felt safe now seemed charged with hidden tension. Every time I passed the neighbor's house, I felt my pulse quicken, wondering what was happening behind those closed doors. I knew I could no longer stand by. I decided to take action cautiously. First, I documented everything I had observed: the bruises, the boy's withdrawn behavior, the late-night arguments I had overheard. I even kept a copy of the note he had slipped me, though its jagged, shaky handwriting made my heart ache. It became clear that if I wanted to help him, I had to be methodical. The risk of his parents discovering that I was paying attention loomed large, and I couldn't underestimate the danger. Child services became my first thought, but I feared they might not act quickly enough. What if the boy was in immediate danger tonight? My concern over their slow processes led me to think about alternative ways to help him safely, ways to communicate without tipping off his parents. I began dropping small, discreet signals: a towel left on my porch when he passed by, a gentle wave of encouragement, brief words of reassurance if our paths crossed outside. I wanted him to know he wasn't alone, even in the midst of fear and isolation. However, my involvement began to attract attention. The parents grew subtly suspicious, their eyes following me when I lingered too long in the yard, their tone sharp when they happened to see me speak to him. I realized that stepping in wasn't just a moral responsibility, it was risky. I was entering a delicate game of observation and subtle intervention, where one wrong move could escalate the danger for both of us. The boy, sensing that someone finally cared, began to confide more in me. He gave small clues about what was happening inside the house: threats, physical punishment, and moments of outright cruelty. Each revelation made my stomach twist in knots, yet it also strengthened my resolve. I could not let fear paralyze me. I had to act. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. A single misstep could unravel all my efforts. Late one evening, after ensuring the neighborhood was quiet, I found myself standing near the edge of the boy's yard, considering my next move. I knew that helping him meant risking confrontation, risking judgment, even risking my own safety. And yet, every thought of leaving him to suffer in silence was unbearable. The simple act of handing a towel days ago had grown into a weighty responsibility, one that demanded courage, vigilance, and unwavering determination. By the end of that week, I understood that I had crossed a threshold. The moment I chose to pay attention, to care beyond mere observation, I had stepped into danger. And though I didn't know what lay ahead, I knew one thing with certainty: I couldn't turn back. The boy's life, fragile and uncertain, had become intertwined with mine, and protecting him would push me further than I had ever imagined. The tension that had been building over the past days finally erupted one evening when I received a frantic, whispered call from the boy. He had disappeared from his home, and the fear in his voice was raw, urgent, and terrifying. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that the danger I had been fearing was now immediate. Every step I had taken, every precaution I had tried to maintain had led to this moment, and now I had to act fast. I grabbed my coat and rushed into the neighborhood, scanning every familiar corner, every shadowed alley, and every secluded spot where a frightened child might hide. My mind raced, thinking through everything I knew about his routines, the places he might feel safe, and the possible dangers lurking in the darkness. The familiar streets that I had walked countless times now felt alien and menacing, each rustling leaf or distant bark amplifying my anxiety. As I navigated the quiet streets, I recalled the boy's subtle signals: the towels, the brief glimpses, the secret notes. Those small interactions, which had once seemed trivial, now became the breadcrumbs leading me to him. My instincts guided me, and after what felt like an eternity, I spotted a faint silhouette crouched behind a low fence in a secluded yard. His small frame shook as he tried to stay hidden, eyes wide with fear and relief at once. I called out softly, keeping my voice calm, reassuring, but firm. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe now." He hesitated, terrified that someone might be watching, but something in my tone convinced him to move toward me. As he slipped into the faint light of the street lamps, I could see the extent of his fear, the bruises, the dirt smudges on his skin, and the trembling hands clutching a small backpack. I felt a surge of protectiveness and relief. I had found him, but the danger wasn't over. We moved cautiously, avoiding neighbors who might be out late or his parents who could be searching frantically. I kept speaking to him in a soft, steady voice, letting him know that I was with him and that he didn't need to be afraid. The boy clung to my side, silent except for quiet, shaky breaths, and I realized that the chain of events had led us here, from a simple towel to a life-threatening flight from his own home. Eventually, we reached a safe spot where I could call the authorities without risking immediate detection. I stayed with him, holding him close, listening to his whispers of thanks, and promising that help was on the way. Relief washed over me, but it was mingled with exhaustion and fear. The ordeal had shown me how fragile life could be, how quickly ordinary days could turn into crises, and how a single act of noticing someone in need could become the catalyst for salvation. By the time the authorities arrived, the boy was safe and in my care. His eyes, once filled with terror and hesitation, now carried a tentative trust. I realized that what had started as a simple, almost meaningless gesture, handing him a towel, had grown into something life-changing, not just for him, but for me as well. That night, as I watched him being taken to safety, I understood the weight of responsibility, the courage required to act, and the extraordinary impact of small acts of kindness in the face of unimaginable fear. It was an ordinary afternoon in the quiet suburban neighborhood where I lived, the kind of day that could easily slip by unnoticed if you weren't paying attention. The sun hung low on the sky, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and pastel-colored houses. I had just returned from running errands, my arms full of groceries, when I noticed my neighbor's son playing in his yard. He was a lanky boy of about 12, with wet hair plastered to his forehead, and he was clearly shivering from the chill of the late afternoon breeze. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids were always running around outside, especially during the summer, and I often saw him playing in the sprinkler or splashing in the small inflatable pool his parents had set up in the backyard. But this time was different. There was a strange tension in the air, something in the boy's movements that made me pause. He seemed hurried, almost desperate, as if he needed something he couldn't quite ask for. Without thinking, I set down my groceries and walked over. "Here, take this," I said, holding out a soft, thick towel I had grabbed from my linen closet earlier that day. My voice was casual, warm, nothing out of the ordinary, but the boy's reaction made my heart skip a beat. He took the towel with trembling hands, his fingers brushing mine just for a moment. And then I saw it. A flash of fear, a hint of something darker than mere discomfort in his eyes. He muttered a quiet, "Thanks." But there was no real warmth in his tone, only urgency, as if he needed to escape from something unseen. I watched him dart back toward his house, clutching the towel around his shoulders like a shield. The ordinary gesture, which in any other circumstance would have been forgotten within minutes, now felt charged with meaning. I tried to shake off the unease that settled in my chest, blaming it on my overactive imagination. After all, I had simply handed a boy a towel. How could something so small be the start of anything significant? Yet, as I returned to my house, the image of his wide, anxious eyes lingered. It was one of those moments that sticks with you, a quiet signal that something is amiss, even if the world around you seems calm and predictable. The neighborhood continued its lazy rhythm, lawnmowers buzzing, dogs barking, and children laughing. But beneath it, I sensed a hidden tension, a story unfolding that I couldn't yet understand. That day, I didn't know that a simple towel would become the first link in a chain of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my neighbors, my sense of safety, and the impact of small acts of kindness. I would later realize that sometimes it is in these ordinary moments that extraordinary consequences begin, quietly, subtly, and almost imperceptibly until they cannot be ignored. In the days following that seemingly innocent encounter, a subtle unease began to settle over me, one I couldn't quite shake. At first, I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, I had simply handed a boy a towel to a wet, shivering boy. But every time I saw him, there was something in his posture, the way he moved, that set my nerves on edge. He had become unusually withdrawn, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones if anyone tried to engage him. There was a stiffness to his movements, as if he were constantly bracing himself for something invisible, and the carefree laughter typical of neighborhood children had vanished from his demeanor. It started with small things. I noticed him flinch at loud noises and flinch again if his parents' voices carried too sharply through the walls of their house. The boy's friends who used to play together without a second thought now skirted around him, whispering behind closed doors. Even the neighborhood dogs seemed to sense his tension, growling at him momentarily before retreating. These were subtle, almost imperceptible signs, but they were there, little signals that something was deeply wrong. One evening, I happened to catch sight of him at the edge of his yard, staring blankly at nothing in particular. There was a shadow behind his eyes, something older than his years, and I felt a pang of worry ripple through me. It wasn't just the fear or anxiety I saw. There was also a desperate need for help, a silent cry I couldn't ignore. I kept replaying that afternoon when I handed him the towel, the slight trembling of his hands, the look that had lingered far too long, and wondered if it had been more than just a shiver from cold water. Then came the strange occurrences that could no longer be brushed aside. Muffled arguments drifted through the walls of the neighbor's house, late at night, voices sharp, urgent, and tinged with anger. Sometimes I would hear sudden thuds as if objects were being thrown in frustration. One evening, the boy appeared at the edge of my porch, just briefly enough for me to notice a faint bruise on his arm before he ducked inside. The sight made my heart tighten, and for the first time, I considered that my instinctive act of kindness might have inadvertently put me in a position of responsibility. I began to question whether I could continue living in ignorance. The neighborhood had always been a place of comfort, predictability, and small daily routines, but now there was a tension underneath the surface, an unspoken secret simmering just out of sight. I began to replay moments, searching for patterns, trying to decipher the boy's behavior and the hidden truths behind his withdrawn demeanor. By the end of that week, I was consumed by unease. What had started as a simple act, handing a towel to a wet, shivering child, had opened a door to something far more serious than I could have imagined. I knew, deep down, that ignoring it would be impossible. There was a silent story unfolding behind those walls, and I couldn't stop thinking that perhaps, somehow, it was now my story to witness, and maybe to act upon. The unease I had been feeling intensified one evening when I noticed the boy standing at the edge of his backyard, partially hidden behind a tree. The street was quiet, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. He looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one was watching, and then he motioned toward me, barely perceptible, a trembling wave that carried urgency. My heart leapt. Something was wrong and he needed me. I stepped closer, careful not to draw attention, and called his name softly. He flinched, but didn't run. Instead, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I need help. Please don't let them find out." My stomach nodded. For the first time, the quiet signs I had noticed over the past days coalesced into a terrifying certainty. He was in danger. It became painfully clear that the boy was living in a household that was far from safe. His small, delicate frame bore the first signs of physical abuse, a faint bruise on his forearm, a scratch on his cheek that hadn't been there the day before. But it wasn't just physical. There was fear in every movement, hesitation in every word. The boy's eyes, which I had wanted me since the day I handed him the towel, now pleaded for someone to intervene, someone to notice that he couldn't protect himself. I realized I needed to act carefully. Direct confrontation with his parents could escalate the danger, but ignoring his plea felt impossible. I tried to reassure him in a calm, steady voice, letting him know I would find a way to help. I handed him another towel, small but symbolic, signaling that he wasn't entirely alone, that someone outside his home had noticed him and cared. The gesture, simple as it was, seemed to provide him a tiny bit of comfort. Before leaving, he slid a small, folded note into my hand when I wasn't looking. My pulse quickened as I unfolded it, reading his hastily scribbled words. "Please help me. I don't know what to do. I can't tell anyone here." The note confirmed everything I had feared. This wasn't a passing problem. It was a deep, ongoing crisis hidden behind the walls of a household that appeared ordinary to everyone else. That night, sleep eluded me. The boy's words echoed in my mind, each syllable heavy with desperation. I started thinking about the consequences of intervention, the risk to both him and myself. Yet there was no turning back. The moment I recognized the danger he was in, I became entwined in his story. My simple act of handing him a towel had inadvertently put me in a position of responsibility, and I couldn't walk away. By the end of that evening, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would find a way to help him, no matter the obstacles. The ordinary gesture that began this chain of events had awakened a sense of duty I couldn't ignore. Little did I know, the coming days would force me to confront dangers I had never imagined, testing my courage and reshaping my understanding of what it truly meant to protect someone.